Okay, now we're going to go on to Facebook Live. And then we have YouTube and NBN, and we cover all the bases, and it's wonderful.
Okay.
And we're just going to have fun and talk about our favorite thing, which is children's books.
Yes.
So we should be going live in a second. We are live. Yay. So Debbie Bibo, welcome to NBN.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes. So before I forget, and I sometimes forget, my name is Mel Rosenberg, and I am the host of the Children's Literature channel of the New Books Network. And I have a wonderful, very, very special guest here, whom I've been waiting to interview for months and months. And it's Debbie Bibo, and welcome to the interview program.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel.
And usually my guests are in America, and they get up at 7 in the morning or 6 in the morning, and you are in Milano.
Where it's the afternoon.
Where it's almost Tel Aviv time.
Right. What time is it in Tel Aviv?
It's we're 5 o'clock and you're 4 o'clock.
Okay, so just an hour. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where to start. So why don't you start by just saying a few words about your wonderful agency, which has the eponymous name of the Debbie Bibo Agency.
Great, I will. So my agency, I founded it in 2011. So it's now been 12 years. Going on 12 years this year. How can I explain it in a very, very kind of succinctly? I would say our agency is a little bit different from other literary agencies in that we're specialized in picture books. So no, not YA or not picture books. So for me, it's really important, the relationship, the text and illustration. So we are a picture book agency. I think that's what distinguishes us maybe from other agencies. That said, we represent both authors, writers, as well as illustrators. I would say most of our artists are illustrators, probably 80%. Smaller percent are writers, authors. And that's because of the way when we initially got started, I was focused on packaging and illustrations. But anyway, I'm very much interested in crossing borders. And so maybe because I myself have crossed borders, maybe because I'm interested in different aesthetics and ways of seeing how illustrators and how writers approach the children's books. But we represent artists from around the world. And so from, of course, English-speaking countries, Italy, of course, since we're based in Italy, France, Germany, Israel, as well as South America, Brazil, Taiwan, Japan, etc. So language, I mean, not that language isn't an issue. Of course, the language we speak to with our artists is English, because that's really important. And I'll put that out there just because it came direct right now, the importance of having a common language. And I say that because we have represented artists in the past who don't speak English very well, and it's very challenging. I'll just say that it's very challenging. It's easy to get lost in translation when you're speaking the same language, and misunderstandings happen all the time when we're both speaking the same language. When two people from two different countries and two different cultures can't speak a common language, it makes it much more difficult. And it sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but I'm not. Because just because of the fact that I've had issues with things that are very, very banal and very like practical things where there's been huge misunderstandings because of Google Translate. I kid you not. So having said that, something that I'm invited to teach seminars at schools, illustration schools, and one of the first things I often say is, if you don't speak a second language, be it English or French or a language that I highly recommend studying it, because I think it's very important that one, you can speak to your editor, to your agent, or to whoever that person might be in that foreign language, which is usually English. Not always, not always.
So that's very interesting because, you know, authors are taught to try and understand, I wouldn't say the language, the language in a high metaphoric sense of the illustrator. And this is very interesting. You're saying, okay, the illustrators also have to understand at a high level of syntax the English text of the picture book.
Very much so. I do. I mean, there have been situations where a publisher will actually translate the text from, let's say, French into English for the artist, for the illustrator. Well, if the illustrator's first language isn't English, they have to know English quite well to understand the nuances, to really understand, to break down that text, to understand it as if it were their own language. And sometimes I've had artists who then have it translated into their language. So that's fundamental, and it's something that almost seems secondary. It seems like, oh, everybody speaks English. It's, you know, that's not true. But the point is not speaking English or not, but it's being able to communicate in that language at a high level. Be it understanding. Maybe your spoken English isn't great, but your comprehension is good, and maybe you don't speak it, you know, brilliantly, but you can write emails. I think that's quite important. And I also represent Italian artists whose and I really kind of push them, because since I can translate for them, but I really think it's important for them to learn English as well. I mean, of course, and I feel like they do know the English, but maybe they're a bit reticent, and they know that I can speak for them, but it's important.
I agree with you. I tell my students who like to speak in Hebrew, and I say, you know, Hebrew is a wonderful language. It's an ancient language. It's 3,500 years old. It's been resurrected. That's fine. But until the rest of the world speaks Hebrew as the lingua franca, we have to learn to speak in English.
Right, right. And so, yeah, so that's just something important for your listeners, viewers who aren't native, you know, mother tongue English. And let me just say one more thing. I think they also have a one-up. They have a one-up because they speak another language, so they have metaphors that are different, visual metaphors that are different. I think that's a plus, that English is not the first language, or the second or third or fourth language. I'll just give you another example. I was just before this interview, I was reviewing a storyboard by a Russian artist we represent. She's an author and an illustrator, and who actually now lives in Israel due to the war, actually. And I was reviewing her text, and she actually she translates her text herself into English. So I don't know what the original Russian is. So it's hard for me to evaluate. What I do know is that she's able to convey herself very well in English. And but what I find interesting when I review, kind of edit these texts, is that there's something different about the text, and I like that difference. Like maybe a native speaker wouldn't write it in that word, or wouldn't use the same words or the same tone, and I find that very interesting and exciting.
I agree with you. I have a book coming out in Israel this summer, even though I've been here 50 years, and I think my Hebrew is terrific. Still, I had to get my Hebrew translated back into English and then back into Hebrew.
Right.
So, you know, the syntax at the end of the day, if you're not a native speaker in the language of the book, you have to find somebody who is.
Right. And that's also interesting, because I've also had, this has happened recently in more than one situation, where I've had Italian authors and artists write directly in English, and then we edit it in English, and then it gets published first in English, and then we sell the rights to an Italian publication, and the Italian feels funky. It feels a little bit different because they wrote it in English. So that's also interesting.
Absolutely.
And then you're used to hearing it in one language.
Well, we have too much in common, because you're also an expat.
Right.
You grew up in the States. Let's go back to Debbie, your early life in California. Start at the very beginning. I was born, you don't have to say when.
Thank you. I was born in Los Angeles, and we moved to Northern California when I was about 2. So I grew up in the Bay Area, in Northern California, and basically raised in the Silicon Valley, in Cupertino to be precise. So of course, it's a completely different place today. But interestingly enough, even as a child, I kind of imagined myself, I kind of launched myself elsewhere. I just didn't think that Cupertino was my home for some reason. Not that I felt like a fish out of water, because I didn't feel like a fish out of water. I just felt like that wasn't my home. So, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Didn't know why. Maybe because my mom herself left Japan at a very young age on her own in the 50s, which was very kind of bold.
That's extraordinary. A few words about your mom.
Yeah, my mom was, an extraordinary woman. She left Japan kind of like what I was saying about myself. Maybe she didn't feel completely, not Japanese. I think she felt Japanese, but there were things about the Japanese culture that she wasn't completely crazy about and in sync with. And she had this kind of, had a free spirit, very independent, strong woman for a Japanese woman at the time. And so she decided that she wanted to leave. And so she had to save up money. And at the time you couldn't, you had to have, what was it called? I can't think of the name of it right now, but she needed to have a name of somebody in the States.
A sponsor.
Thank you. She had to have a sponsor. So her older sister, who was 20 years older than her, who lived in Washington, D.C. because she had lived with a diplomat. She married a diplomat. She was a sponsor, but it was actually, she could go there if she would take care of their kids. And so she did that. She took a merchant ship because her father knew somebody. And it's incredible that her parents even let her go. Went on a merchant ship. So the only woman, not even on a passenger ship. She lands after a few weeks on the ship in Port of Los Angeles, which it sounds like at the time probably still is like a scary place. And she got there and she said, "What am I doing here? Why did I come here?" Long story short, she ended up going to DC and babysitting her nephews and nieces, didn't like it. And she said, "I'm out of here," and went to Berkeley, where there was another sponsor, because there's always like this Japanese connection. And there was a woman who, rented out rooms to Japanese students. And my parents met there. My dad went to UC Berkeley. He grew up in Berkeley, and they met in Berkeley. So maybe
1 second. How did they, Debbie? How did they meet? We have lots of time, and if we don't finish today, we'll have another interview.
That's interesting. They actually met at as the family legend says, my mom worked at the cinema as like the ticket lady in the ticket booth in it. And I think my dad went by and noticed her. And my mom was in an international kind of students association. I think my dad was really interested in international students. So these kind of things that both my parents have, I think kind of they passed on to me as well. So they were both into the international students and had lots of international friends. They met at the movie theater. I love the movies. And that's actually how they met.
Okay,
and let me say, at the time, so we're talking the late 1950s, my mom, Japanese woman, my father, American Jew, basically, they eloped because neither family accepted the other. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So
wow.
at the time, there was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment, especially in California also at the time. The Japanese family couldn't believe that my mom would marry not only a non-Japanese person, but a Jewish American who was this guy, and the same for my father's family. They couldn't imagine him marrying a Japanese woman. And interestingly enough, I have correspondence between my father and my Japanese grandfather, who I never met because he died before I was born. Correspondence in beautiful English that he wrote, where they slowly came to accept him.
Wow.
And vice versa.
It's incredible. Is that written up? Is there a book on that? There should be.
No, there's not a book on that, but there is something about the Bibos, and the Bibo side of my family is also a very interesting story as well. And I'll just make it really short, but my great grandfather, Solomon Bibo, came over from Prussia in 1860s, 1870s. And a lot of the men at the time would bring over their wives or their future wives. Well, the Bibos, when they got to New York, they split, and the kind of intellectual Bibos remained in New York and became the Bibos. And then the rugged ones, which were my folk, the Bibos went out west. And Solomon Bibo, they started trading with the Native Americans, and Solomon Bibo actually became he married locally, married a Hopi Native American woman, and learned the languages of the different tribes and became an activist for the Native Americans, and actually became probably the first and only, I think, I should document this, Jewish Jewish Hopi chief, because he really, I mean, they not only traded with them, but they the trading store, but they actually, he was an activist for their rights, for the Native American rights. So I think I think there's a book
Debbie, yeah, there's at least one book there. I'm surprised at you. Incredible. So like in a couple of sentences, what was your home like when you were like 5, 6 years old? Was your mom fluent in English? Did you celebrate Jewish holidays?
Both
Help me.
Both are interesting. So my parents divorced when I was young, and so I had two very distinct lives. One, the Japanese side, which would be all of my my aunts and uncles on my mom's side moved to the States after years and years. They all kind of, and my mom had a big family, so I would spend a lot of time with the Japanese side, my grandmother, my obasan, and my aunts and uncles for holidays, and then would spend maybe the same holiday at my grandparents' house with my father, and celebrating, I wouldn't say that they were observant Jews, but not celebrating Hanukkah, but they didn't celebrate Christmas. I mean, they didn't have a Christmas tree. So we actually grew up kind of non-denominational because we had kind of these both sides. My mom's family is Buddhist, because the Jewish, so they kind of let us choose for ourselves. But yeah, I had a very I guess interesting, just because very bi-cultural, I would say, childhood. It was raised knowing, feeling these very strong roots on both sides, very strong and very different. And I felt them both strongly, and I felt that I was both of these worlds.
Incredible.
But at the same time, I have to say, and it was interesting growing up in Cupertino at the time. Cupertino has become a very, very Asian city. At the time, it wasn't. And there were very few. My three best friends, we were all, I think looking back on it, it's quite interesting. My best friend, Chinazo, who's still one of my best friends, she half Nigerian, half Croatian. My other friend, Maureen, was half Samoan, half Irish. And my other friend, Sylvia, was half German, half African-American. And so I just think it's interesting that I happen to gravitate toward, or we happen to gravitate toward each other, because it was actually quite white at the time. Now it's completely changed. But I think I did grow up knowing that I was, biracial, different than most of my friends when I was 5. In fact, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I wanted to be like them. I wanted to have blonde hair and blue eyes, and my middle name is Miyoko. And people say, what does the M stand for? And I used to say Michelle, because I really wanted to, I didn't want to be perceived as different, which I think is something that children have. And even adults too.
Another book right there, even though they're similar in the genre. So that's incredible. How old were you when your parents separated?
I was young, like 3 years old.
Okay, so you know my theory.
What? I don't know.
Okay, people who deal in picture books are 5-year-olds.
People who like people who write books, or people who work with children's books
have a very strong 5-year-old self in them. How connected are you to the 5-year-old Debbie Bibo?
Oh no, that's an interesting. No, that's interesting. I don't know. I don't know how connected I am. Sometimes I feel like I'm in constant dialogue with that. I don't know how to say 5-year-old, but with that that child, I tend to remember her really well. The 5-year-old, the 3-year-old, I remember well. The 5-year-old, the 8-year-old. I feel like I have a really active oniric life, and I dream a lot, and I'm able to kind of tap into those dreams. And yeah, I've never thought about that theory of people who work with children's books are basically 5-year-olds, but it's interesting because what I
Yeah, you could be a 6-year-old, but in that
yeah, no,
neighborhood.
what I find is that people who are very I don't want to say successful, people who are able to tell stories, tell children's stories, either writing it, illustrating it, or both, I think are very much in touch because they're able to access that part and they're able to empathize with that child. And they're, I think, also able to remember who they were at that age. And they weren't, at least this is what I remember for myself. I remember feeling very much older than I was, thinking like, these people are talking to me as if I were, some young, dumb kid, and actually they have no idea, right? All the things that I'm thinking, or I don't know. I remember having that thought vividly, which brings me to something that happened yesterday, since it's fresh in my mind. I went to a museum here in Milan called Pinacoteca di Brera, and a local bookstore here that I often work with, and we're really good friends. They did this very kind of interesting interactive event with the museum, where children were, but not only children, anybody basically, is open to anyone. They set up a house, like a wooden little house filled with picture books, illustrated books, about 150 illustrated books. Yeah, the director of the museum is really kind of visionary, thought of this idea.
I have to go.
No, yeah, actually, no, it's fascinating. But basically,
so when is it open?
It's this is like the third Sunday of every month. But let me tell you the thing which is interesting, because I was struck by it, and I was struck by watching this little kid do it. Basically, the activity is this: you look at they selected this painting by Bellini in the museum, and they noticed 3 different characters in the painting. The question is, what, like, there's a giraffe, there's a man looking out, and there's a veiled woman. So the question is, where is the giraffe going? What is the man looking at, and what is under the veil? And they invite you to find the answers in these illustrated books, right? And so for me, I know I was super excited, and I started looking in the books, and I was kind of very literal, like trying to find the answer. Like, I wonder what the answer is. I wonder where the giraffe is going. And what I saw watching these children was, number one, it's obviously a way to put the painting in relationship with the visual art in children's books. But I also found it was a different way of reading a children's book, of reading a picture book. Right? It was a different approach completely. And there's so many different approaches. And this is something why I love, and why I have gravitated toward, and why it's become my not only my passion, but my life's work, is that children's books offer something, I believe. And it's not even a different genre. It's something in and of itself that other books don't. And it is the interdependence between text and illustrations. Now, doing this exercise is obviously something completely different, and there's a different way, but it's still, you can use picture books in so many different ways. I have friends who use picture books with, psychologists who use picture books with their patients, or speech therapists who use picture books with their patients as well. So there's different. I feel like the use is so much greater. Of course, these books are primarily for children, but the uses are I think much deeper, and not much deeper, but much the scope. There's a greater scope for the actual use of picture books. Oh, and so hold on. I told you all this why? Because of the child, he was more like an 8-year-old. But I saw this child, the things that his answers, the book that he found was not like a picture book for toddlers, or the choice was quite great, the selection. And it was a photographic book, like an encyclopedic photographic book, who you would think would be much more for adults. And he was so, he was just very concentrated. And the fact that he went to one book and found all 3 answers in one book just made me think of, often we project onto kids something that really that we don't know that they aren't. Like, this kid was basically thinking or not thinking, he was reacting, as kids do, in the most open way possible. In the most open way possible, in his way. I just thought it was radical that he chose one book instead of three. I don't know, like thinking out of the box and going toward a book that one wouldn't expect for children. So I think that's really surprising as well. We say know your audience when you write, know your audience when you illustrate. Do we really know our audience? I don't know. And so maybe going back to your question, I guess all we can know is that child in ourselves. I mean, that's a great starting point. And then also being around other children as well, I think helps a lot too.
And I don't know of a genre that has more audiences, because you have to write to the kid inside you, and then to the kid everywhere else, and the parents and grandparents and librarians and school children and your agent and the editors and the publishers, and probably I've forgotten a few.
Right. No, it's true. And the adults who and the adults who love children's books, or like you say, the parents who then might be reading at a different level as well.
I look at children's books, and that's part of the reason that I write and I interview, as almost holy. Like for me, this is like a something very sacred, to be able to touch a child at the formative age of 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, and have a book that, I mean, the books that I grew up with as a 5-year-old have imprinted me my whole life. Do you remember any books from when you were 4 or 5?
I don't. And in all honesty, what I remember is my mom didn't read books to us. I think I started reading at a young age, because I remember in kindergarten I could read. That I remember I could read. And what I remember is, when you had asked about, my mom, she did of course speak English fluently, but she didn't read to us, but we went to the library. We went to the library, the public library, and that was one of my favorite places, I have to say. And I think she would drop us off at the library. And I think at that time, like, we were on our own, like for the day at the library, and that was kind of my paradise. But what I do remember is being read to by my teachers. And I remember I have a very vivid memory of being read to either in kindergarten or the first grade. And we would sit in a circle, like on the ground around the teacher. And I remember when she read, having like a tingling feeling on my shoulder, like feeling really kind of warm and tingly. And I think that is the feeling that has always stayed with me. Not so much, and I remember reading books when I was a bit older, not picture books though. I remember reading books, narrative books. But I think that feeling of being read to, and of feeling very special, and of imagining these things together, I think that collective experience, but also feeling like she was reading to me, was very strong.
And when she was reading to the circle, you could see the illustrations?
Yeah. She would read to us, and then show us the illustrations. And that's something I ended up doing right before the pandemic. The year before the pandemic, I started having these story times at this local bookstore, and that was an incredible experience for me, reading, because I read to my son, of course, when he was a child, but now he's 21, and so I don't have that audience anymore. And having reading again to children, and just seeing the joy, the pure joy, and also it also made a bit more concrete. Like, I feel like what I do as an agent is quite abstract, in the sense I work with artists, I work with illustrators, we work on projects together, we sell the rights, we see the book published, we promote it. But who's actually, I mean, we read it, we love the books, but we don't know how the books are going to go over. And so actually I would read books that, classics, as well as books that I represent. And it was really exciting to see how kids reacted to certain stories. And right away if a child is interested. If they're not interested, they'll just walk. These kids are like 2 years old, they'll crawl or walk away. If they're not interested, there's no keeping them there. And so to kind of watch them choose certain books, because at that age, even at 2, they know what they like and what they don't like, and what holds their attention and what doesn't. And that doesn't make it a bad book. It just means it's not for that child. And if it happens enough, maybe there is something to reconsider about the book.
Well, one of the things that you've written about is how you select stories and illustrators based on one word, which you call vision. We'll get back to that, but now it's clear to me, based on the story you told of sitting in the circle and feeling this tingling, maybe you're looking for that same tingling when you look at artwork or a text.
That's an interesting connection. Maybe it is. What I know, what I do have, what I get almost instinctively, and sometimes people ask, how do you choose? How do you select? It is, for me, it's instinctive. It's instinctive. And if I don't feel sometimes I even get the opposite feeling, which is I get a bad feeling, or like sometimes I see something that I just don't like, and it almost physically affects me. I feel like physically ill. It's terrible to say, but it's true. So in the same vein, when something strikes me, when there's something, I just fall in love with it. I want to know more. I want to, it's like falling in love. And it's like having that feeling that purely, for me, it's purely instinctive. And so, and sometimes that instinct doesn't translate into commercial success, right? Who knows? I mean,
because you said it, Debbie. It's impossible to predict what the reader response is going to be at the end of the day. And if you could do that, then all books would sell out and all books would have multiple printings and be widely successful.
Right. So all I can do as an agent is absolutely support and back the work that I love. And that's what I say also to artists who submit their work to us. If I don't connect, and also I don't work alone. I also, my associate is Ilaria De Monti. We work very closely together. We read things separately, like submissions, she'll read, I'll read, and then we discuss it together. And sometimes she might say something like, oh, that's a good point, or vice versa. But what I try to do is, if I love something, I think I can sell it. I'm pretty sure if I love something, I'm pretty sure I can sell it if it's at a good point. And if it's not at a good point, we could work on it to get it at a good point. But I think my job is to select work that I love and that I feel should be on the market and could be on the market, and that I feel I can place in the market, and I feel that it is valid. So if I don't feel like a work is valid, or it should be on the market, or could be on the market, or it has problems, it's very difficult for me to convince other people. And I'll tell you why. And this is something that I tell my artists, but I tell also people who submit their work to me. Even if I like their work, if I feel like there's something that's not working in it, and the artist doesn't agree, it's very difficult for me then to find a publisher, because, and this has happened time and time again, is when I start pitching the book to publishers and they start making critiques or bringing up the weak points, if what they're saying coincides with what I said to the artist, then what do you do? It's like, oh, I can't defend it. I say, oh, I totally agree. I can't defend it. And so if a publisher says to me, listen, this, I just feel like the voice is weak, or I don't know, they won't maybe put it in those terms, but I feel like this has been seen before, the end is not working. And I said that exact same thing to the artist. Well, at that point, I can either go back and tell the artist again, but I already told that to the artist. So do you see what I'm saying? It's very, I think what I'm trying to say is that it's important that I believe that the artist believes in the work, but for me to represent that, I totally believe in it, and that the relationship that I have with the artist you represent is one in which there is mutual understanding and openness. Because if an artist isn't willing to change things, and I'm the first step, I'm the first filter, right? I mean, it's the agent who, then the next step is then the publisher, and then the publisher will want to edit it. So if somebody comes on board and is very kind of adamant and says, no, this is my vision for the book, and it doesn't, and I'm not quite sure about it, then I'd rather just let it go and say, you know what, that's great. And I hope you find a publisher, because there are times where they do also, that's wonderful. I'm just not the right agent for that artist.
Okay. But when writers or illustrators get feedback like that, I hope you give them a day or two to cool off.
Yeah,
Because we tend to bristle and say, "Oh,
yeah,
don't you get it? Don't you get it? Don't you
I
get it?" And then it takes a day or two. You have to give them the day or two cooling off, right?
I realized I should have studied psychology. I should have. I should probably still take some lessons in psychology because it's true. It's, I think we're all very sensitive people. I think we're all sensitive. Uh, Artists particularly sensitive. I consider myself a sensitive person, but and I realize when anybody gives a critique or something that you've maybe spent a long time working on, it's very difficult to accept and to hear and to hear. And so, yes, no, I think also it's also like a dance. And I think, I know the people I work with, and I know maybe the right approach or how to approach or how not to approach it. And there's been times where it doesn't work. It doesn't always work.
Okay, but as a writer, it's the most important thing, because when you get feedback from editors, even if they tell you things that are dreadful, like the ending is not the ending.
Right.
You know,
The
your
ending is bad.
initial,
Yeah, it's a
yeah,
bad ending.
your initial comment is to yourself is, what does he or she know? I've been working on this like for years. But at the end of the day, the great endings come when you do listen to the agent or the editor. And after working it out, but it does take a day or two or a week or a month to cool off and then be able to think about it clearly. I want to go back. So before I go back, I knew that we would not finish today. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know how long this is supposed to go on for. So
how much longer do you have?
no, I know it's fine. It's fine. I just maybe I don't want people to get bored. It's like a super. Anyway.
No, nobody's getting bored, and we don't care. We're having fun.
Okay.
So I want to challenge you now.
Yeah.
That now I understand why you are in Europe.
Why? Why is
And
that? Why is that?
okay, I'm going to say something that some people in the States are not going to like, and a few
Okay.
people in Canada.
Okay.
My feeling is, this is really oy vey, Debbie. I'm going to get in
Okay.
trouble for this.
Go for it.
Like for me, picture books are holy. They are sacrament. They influence the whole lives of 4 and 5-year-olds. Sometimes, like you say, a kindergarten kid will have a read on a book and cherish this for life. And you talk about vision, and sometimes in America, I'm going to get into big trouble. They talk about money, and that you should write for the market. And I say, oh, I was a scientist for 30 years. I was writing for the market. I was writing for this. No, a children's book should be written for the heart. And you just told me that you judge books by whether you get a tingling feeling. And you didn't say anything about being able to sell the book, the marketability, the commercial hooks. And I know that this is in your mind, but I'm hoping that it's secondary.
No, of course, those things are in my mind. Of course they are, but they all are secondary. They really are, because even there have been times, no, absolutely, and I wish I could say that the money comes with it. And of course, I'm happy to say that the agency has grown over the years, and our artists have grown, and some people. I think this is a real a success story, is when an artist can live off their art. And not all artists can, and not all children's book authors can, and we have several who now do. And I think that's a real measure of success for me. And it's not for everyone, because not all children's book authors have, I feel like if a person says, this is what I want to do, and I hope someday I can live off my art, and they do, that for me is incredible. That doesn't mean people are like, crazy rich, or we have some books that have done phenomenally well and have sold in many countries. Can
you give an example, please?
Yes. So I didn't do my homework, because by Davide Calli and Benjamin Shaw. I think we're now at 25 translations. This is thanks to Chronicle Books. Chronicle Books has world rights, and their team sold those rights. It turned into a book series. So that's a really big, those are kind of big numbers.
Who was the editor that acquired it?
Naomi Kirsten of Chronicle Books. We have, of course, Chris Houghton's books have done phenomenally well from the get-go. I have to say, he's been very constant over the years, and he's, again, I think it's also interesting to see authors like Davide Kali, Benjamin Shaw, Chris Houghton, who consistently put out books every year. Davide Kali puts out quite a few, but Chris Houghton, his picture books are 32 pages. It might look like it might take 6 months. His books take around 1 year to produce, to make, then publish. So he's now coming out with one book every 2 years. And those books, if you do the numbers, you might think 1 book every 2 years. He has to sell a lot of books to be able to live off that. Well, in his case, what's important are not only the books that come out in English by his publisher Walker Books, but Walker Books has done a phenomenal job on the co-editions. And so again, his books are published in various languages. And that's really important. And that's something that maybe in the United States, maybe, well, I think today, not as much, but I think that's something that authors need to know, that the foreign editions are a source of a very important source of revenue for your book. Sometimes books do better in other countries than in your own country, which is incredible, right? That's absolutely incredible. Or to think that's, so.
Here in Israel, Ephraim Kishon did better in Germany and Austria than, and I want to have Chris on the show. And actually, I found you via Chris. So I don't want to talk too much about Chris, except
yeah. Oh, no, Chris is wonderful, and he has so much to say and so much insight. I've learned I learned a lot from working with him. We did like an interview together a few years ago.
So please tell him that Mel is on his track.
I will.
And how much fun I hope you had today. So maybe he will come around and.
No, absolutely, and yeah, he's just
But when I'm in a bookstore in London,
okay,
or Bristol, the books are different. It's not your typical American fair, and ostensibly it's the same language. But my question to you is it really?
Is it really different? Are books really different? Is that what you're asking?
The picture books in Britain,
yes,
are not the same picture books.
No. They're not the same. They're not the same at all. And I think that's a great exercise to go into a bookstore in New York or in London and one in Paris, and just to see that it's quite immediate. They're very different, and the aesthetics are different. What I think is interesting, I think in the past several years in the United States, is I think the American market has opened up to the European market and to the Asian market, and that's exciting. I think when I first started, my agency 12 years ago, and was pitching projects, this is what people would say constantly, and it was a nice way of saying no. It was there's a real European feel to a real European aesthetic, there's a real European feel, and that meant sophisticated, too sophisticated, and or not American enough. And I got that over and over, and finally I was like, oh, subtext, no, it's not commercial. That was the subtext. I feel like now with the number of interesting independent publishers, there are quite a few. I think Enchanted Lion really kind of has made its tracks, Claudia at Enchanted Lion, but as well as a lot of other independent publishers have helped pave the way for the more commercial publishers to say, hey, wait a minute, there is a market. It doesn't have to have a certain kind of I'll just say Disneyan for lack of a better term, but that more commercial look. I mean, of course, those books might sell more, but then we have authors and illustrators like John Klassen, who I would consider has a more European look, a more minimal, ironic, maybe subtlety that some American books don't have. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely, books are different, but I think that's now a plus. I'm beginning to see it now. Initially, I was kind of crestfallen. I would go to the book fairs and come home crestfallen because of this response. Now I feel like there are, and not only independent book publishers, but there's a book publisher we work with who we love, Tundra Books. They're part of the Penguin Random House.
Canadian.
Of course, Canadian. But I think also since they're Canadian, but we work a lot with them, and they are very much open to kind of quirkier, a bit funkier. There's also terms that are often used.
Debbie, I'm going to get into trouble again. The Canadians are more European.
I think they're closer. I think there's something about the Canadian culture. Not that I know it well. I've been there once. I went to Toronto once, but I feel like the culture is halfway between they have their own culture, but United States and Europe. There's something a bit.
And it is.
Yeah.
You're making me miss Canada, actually. So listen, I want to have you on again, but we're starting to run out of time, and I want to grab you afterwards for a couple of minutes.
Absolutely.
So what is the agency looking for these days? Most of the audience is probably going to be from North America here, but you never know. You never know.
Right.
What is the agency looking for these days?
A good story, a good original story with surprising illustrations. Could be something that surprises me on an emotional level, could be something that surprises me with its humor. I love humor, absolutely love humor. I also lyrical text, but I think I'm more interested and more, I lean more toward humor. I'm looking for that tingling feeling.
Okay. Also authors, because more and more agents in North America are closing the doors to author-only texts.
Yeah, I'm also open to authors. Same thing. Always looking for a good story. Of course, good writing. Something that I'm looking for, and something that it's not that easy to find. Two things I'm looking for. Especially interested in author illustrators, somebody like Chris Houghton, who's an author illustrator. And not all illustrators are also authors, but we have several who have kind of morphed, and they try it out, and then one book after another, they kind of learn, because that's also interesting. But in terms of authors, if you're an author, if you're an author, I think what's important is to understand that the children's books texts, there's not only the text, there's also illustration, and to leave room and to learn that, to leave room for illustration. And I think sometimes maybe debut writers or writers at the kind of the first stages don't know that. And I think that's problematic, because they have to, and you do that just by reading picture books, but you have to learn that you have to leave space. It can't all be resolved in the text.
I'm with you. I think that my transition came when I started. Author only, they have what I call illustrator envy. And I suffered from that for years. But actually, the more you open up to the illustrations, the better your book is going to be. And
the levels, I mean, just the levels, that going back to that one book that I told you I didn't do my homework because that series, Benjamin Shaw brought that the text was brilliant in and of itself, but he brought it to another level because he added things that weren't in the text. I think that's what publishers, editors, agents, that's what we're looking for. Okay,
that's wonderful. And just to make it clear, how many submissions do you get of art and texts a year?
A year? Oh, I can tell you how many we get, like in a month.
We can multiply that.
Probably get like 30 or 40 in a month.
That's all?
Yeah, 30. Yeah.
30 or 40 submissions?
Submissions, probably, yeah.
You're going to get a lot more after this interview.
Or maybe more, I'm trying to think. And what I feel bad, maybe get more, but no, I would say about.
But let's summarize. You're looking in particular for author illustrators of picture books, or illustrators, or authors who have illustrators in their hearts.
Yes. That's a great summing up. Yeah, it's a good summing up.
So we still have lots to talk about, but we've kind of run out of time.
Okay.
So,
well, anyway, it was wonderful talking to you. And
so Debbie Bibo from Debbie Bibo Agency in Milano. If I knew you existed, Milano is 3 hours from Tel Aviv.
I know.
I'm going to New York. I could have saved a lot of money. So I'm going to ask everybody else. All the wonderful author and illustrators, Israelis. Debbie is interested also in illustrators and authors from all over the world. this is your opportunity. And I've looked at your website, and the material is incredible.
Thank
So,
you. I was going to say one thing, if I could also
sure.
tell your audience, for people looking for agents, I think it's really important to look around and look at a big number of agents, and look at lots of agents and see if there's something in that agency that speaks to you, because I think it's a relationship, and there has to be. It can't. I received a submission today, or well, anyway, I often receive submissions from people that their artwork or that has nothing to do with our agency. So it's important that you find it has the right one for you. And it's kind of like, you can call it shopping or whatever it is, but I think because it's such also an intense relationship, there has to be that that affinity. There has to be an affinity.
Yeah, but there's another angle. I would also I would add to that wonderful websites like yours can teach the author / illustrator a lot about what success means, what success looks like, what success sounds like, and give the artist ideas.
Right. So I think it's great to study, and in the same way as like what agents do, and I think what you do too when you interview people. When I'm going to meet with a new editor, I try to find out as much as possible about that editor and about the publishing house, about what they've done recently, what they're doing, because that gives me more information, so I could then kind of tailor my pitch to them and kind of say which books I want to show them and which I'm not going to show them. Right. So yes.
Exactly. So Debbie Bibo, it's been wonderful. And I'm going to mention that my name is Mel Rosenberg, and I'm the host of what am I the host of? The Children's Literature Channel of the New Books Network. And this has been remarkable. I dreamed of having a wonderful conversation with you, and this has really been much better.
Thank you. It's been really fun.
We're going to throw everybody out, and we're going to come back and have just a short tete-a-tete.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Ciao. Ciao, ciao.
So I thought I left the meeting.
It's still recording.
Okay, so we're going to close the recording, and we're still